Mrs. Merriman looked a little worried. "Oh dear," she said. She tried to stifle a cough with her handkerchief. "I'll help you, Mother," Felicity burst out. "At least, I'll try." Mrs. Merriman handed Felicity the parcel. "We will both try," she said, "and the gown will be lovely. You wait and see." Felicity was so full of happiness she had no room for words. She held the precious parcel close to her chest and smiled at her mother. "I am going to have the most beautiful gown in all the world," she thought, "because I have the most wonderful mother in all the world." That very evening Mrs. Merriman set to work making Felicity's gown. Felicity watched, biting her bottom lip with concern, as her mother cut the slippery blue silk into pieces. "These pieces are such odd shapes, Mother," Felicity said nervously. "Will they ever come together to make a gown?" "I do indeed hope so," Mrs. Merriman smiled. But she looked a little nervous, too. It seemed like a miracle when she pinned the pieces together and Felicity could see sleeves, a waist, and a neckline taking shape. The next morning, Mrs. Merriman began sewing the pieces together. Felicity was very eager to help. She threaded the needle for her mother and handed her the pins as she needed them. She and Nan stood behind Mother's chair watching her work. After a little while, Mother turned to them. "Now, girls," she said, "you are making me uncomfortable. Please don't peer over my shoulders and stare at every stitch I make." Then she smiled. "Wouldn't you rather play with the ark?" she asked. "Yes," said the girls. "Me too," said William. "Very well then," said Mother. Felicity, you may bring it down." Felicity stood on the stool to lift the ark down from its high shelf. The ark was a special toy they brought out only at Christmastide. All three children loved to play with the wooden boat and the small painted animals that went inside. Now they sat at Mother's feet and happily lined the animals up in pairs. Every once in a while, Felicity would pop up to check her mother's progress. "Mother," she said, "must you sew so slowly? Couldn't you make bigger stitches? No one is going to see them." Mrs. Merriman sighed. "Lissy, you know what I always tell you. Haste makes waste. If you want the gown to be perfect, you must be patient." Patient was always hard for Felicity to be patient. It was especially hard now, with Christmas only 3 days away, and the dance lesson at the palace just 13 days after that. But as the next few days went by, Felicity tried very hard to be patient. She stood still for hours while her mother fitted the gown to her. It was quite uncomfortable to stand without moving, but Felicity never complained, and when the fittings were over, she tried to help with the household chores so that her mother would have more time to work on the gown. She played with William, she read with Nan, and she helped Rose to cook. Felicity wanted her mother to have as much time as possible. Because it was the holiday season, friends and visitors came to call every afternoon. In past years, Felicity had enjoyed all the holiday gaiety. She had fun passing the special Christmas cakes and listening to the visitors chatter, but this year Felicity was always impatient for the guests to leave. It seemed to her that they talked on and wasted time when her mother could have been sewing. Christmas Eve afternoon brought a steady stream of guests. Felicity's heart sank every time she heard another knock on the door. Another hearty voice calling out, "Merry Christmas!" She groaned to herself every time another happy, laughing group settled in for a long visit. When the last guests finally left, Felicity sighed with relief. "Now you can go work on my gown," she said to her mother. Mrs. Merriman coughed. She looked very tired. "Please, Felicity, don't nag at me," she said. "I have a great deal of work to do to get ready for tomorrow. Run along now." Felicity did run along. First she went to Elizabeth's house. Then she and Elizabeth went to the miller's shop to visit the pretty doll and study every detail of her beautiful gown. "Your gown will look like that soon," Elizabeth assured her. "I hope so," said Felicity. "Mother must still attach the sleeves and do the hem and add the lace trim, and your gown will be finished in time," said Elizabeth. "Don't worry." The miller's doll looked as if she hadn't a worry in the world. She smiled at Felicity with a cheery smile, full of hope and bright expectation. Felicity felt happier than when she looked at the doll. As soon as she got home, Felicity ran up the stairs. Carefully she lifted the unfinished gown out of the clothes press. She held the waist of the gown to her own waist, and the blue silk wished down around her feet. Someone snorted behind her. Felicity turned and saw Ben. "That fancy gown," he scoffed. "That's all you care about. You've become a selfish, foolish girl. You think only of dancing at the palace in your finery. When you think at all, you don't know what is important anymore. If your horse Penny came back now, you'd be too busy dreaming to care." "That's not true!" cried Felicity. "I think it is," said Ben. He turned on his heel and left. Felicity could not sleep that night. She lay awake thinking about what Ben had said. Was she selfish and foolish? She knew she still loved Penny, the horse she had tamed and then had helped to run away. Couldn't she love dancing in gowns too? She heard some rustling downstairs. She crept out of her bedstead and down the stairs. Felicity saw her mother sitting at the table working on the blue gown by the light of a single candle. "Mother," whispered Felicity, "why are you working on the gown now? The fire is dying and it's dreadfully cold down here." Mrs. Merriman coughed a bit and smiled a weary smile. "I didn't have time to sew today," she said. "I was busy with guests all afternoon. Then I had to finish decorating. Tomorrow's Christmas." Felicity looked around the dark parlor. She could see that her mother had decorated every window pane with a cheery sprig of holly. "The parlor looks beautiful, Mother," said Felicity. She hugged her mother. "You make everything beautiful." Mrs. Merriman smiled at Felicity as she folded the blue gown with care. "I love the greenery, too," she said. It keeps my spirits up and helps me hold on to the hopes of spring. She bent to kiss Felicity's forehead. And now to bed, Lissy. Tomorrow will be a busy day. Christmas Day was full of exciting noises. Cannons roared and guns were fired to mark the special day. People called out merry greetings of the season as Felicity and her family walked to church. Felicity shivered with pleasure when organ music filled the church and everyone's voices soared together. And as they sang the joyful songs, Felicity smiled to herself when the minister read the words of the Christmas story. And the angel said unto them, Fear not, for behold, I bring good tidings of great joy, which shall be to all people. The word seemed to be meant especially for Felicity this Christmas. There, she thought, Father is right. Christmas is not a time for anger. It is a time of great joy for all people. The angel said so. There certainly was great joy back at the Merriman's house. When everyone sat down to dinner, Felicity's mother and Rose had prepared a tremendous Christmas feast. Mrs. Merriman sat at the head of the table, serving up steaming bowls of soup and making sure everyone's plate was full of venison, ham, and turkey. She herself cut Ben 3 pieces of minced pie. Rest yourself, my dear, said her husband. You've stuffed us all and barely taken a bite of fine feast you and Rose made. A bite of the fine feast you and Rose made. But Mrs. Merriman just smiled and handed around a plate of dates and figs to finish off the glorious meal. Felicity went to bed full of food and full of happiness. She closed the red checked curtains around her bedstead so that she would be cozy. She could hear the sweet sound of carolers singing outside beneath her window. Oh, tidings of comfort and joy, comfort and joy. Oh, tidings of comfort and joy. Felicity decided there had never been a finer Christmas. As she snuggled under her counterpane and drifted off to sleep, she thought about the beautiful blue gown. Now that Christmas is over, she said to herself, Mother will have time to finish it. That was a thought of great comfort and great joy. Chapter 4. Gloom and Shadows. When Felicity awoke the next morning, the house seemed too quiet, especially after the jolly noises of the day before. Breakfast was very odd because Mother was not there. Mother is overtired, Father explained. She wore herself out making Christmas merry for all of us. She needs to rest today, but she says she will be up and about tomorrow. The day passed slowly. A steady, stubborn rain fell. Felicity couldn't remember a time when Mother had stayed in bed all day like this. Several times Felicity opened the door and peered into the darkness of Mother's room. Surely she'll be better tomorrow, Felicity thought. She'll be well enough to sew my gown. The dance lesson is only 12 days away. But Mother was not better the next day, nor the day after that. In fact, she was much worse. Coughs shook her frail body. She was burning with fever one minute and shivering with chills the next. Mr. Gulp, the apothecary, came to see her. When he walked out of her room, he shook his head and frowned. "She is very ill, Mr. Merriman," he said. "She is so worn down that she has no strength to fight the fever. She's struggling to breathe. I'm afraid it looks very bad." "What can we do?" said Mr. Merriman. Felicity had never seen him so worried. "Someone must be with her all the time, both day and night," said Mr. Galt. "Keep the fire in her room bright and warm. If she wakes up, try to give her water or broth. I'll leave some medicine for you to give her, too." "But how long will she be this way?" said Mr. Merriman. Can't we do any more to help her?" Mr. Galt paused on his way to the door. "All we can do is hope, and to pray," he said. "We must hope and pray and wait." From that moment, Felicity's life changed. It was as if she had walked out of the sunlight and into a land of gloom and shadows, where it was never bright, just gray all day long. The outside world did not exist. No holiday visitors came to call. Felicity did not go to lessons at Miss Manderley's, or to Elizabeth's house, or to the miller's shop to visit the pretty doll. Felicity, who usually found it hard to sit still for more than 5 minutes, now took turns with her father and Rose, sitting next to her mother's bedside for hours and hours. She didn't want to be anywhere else. When her mother shook with chills, Felicity covered her with blankets. When her mother tossed and turned with fever, Felicity wiped her forehead with a cool cloth, dipped in a lavender scent. Sometimes her mother woke, but she was too weak to speak. Felicity held a soup plate of broth to her mother's lips and gave her spoonfuls of it. Most of the time, her mother slept a troubled, uncomfortable, restless sleep. The days between Christmas and New Year's Day blurred into one long twilight. When Felicity thought about the dance lessons at the palace and the beautiful blue gown, none of it seemed to matter. There was only one thing Felicity wanted now. She wanted Mother to get well. On New Year's Day, Felicity sat next to her mother's bed, listening to her faint breath. "Happy New Year, Mother," she whispered. Her mother did not stir. A cold, cold fear filled Felicity. Her mother's face was as white as the moon. When Mother was well, her hands were always busy, always moving, always making things, or doing things for others. Now her hands lay still upon the blankets. Felicity lifted one of her mother's hands and held it to her own cheek. "I won't let you die," she whispered. Felicity wished she could pour some of her own warmth and energy into her mother. If only she could make Mother well. If only there was something she could do. But she was helpless. Felicity put her head down on the bedstead and cried. When Felicity came out of her mother's room, Father was waiting for her. "You have been a great help caring for Mother," said Father. "I have a New Year's Day present for you." He smiled as he handed Felicity a lumpy package wrapped in paper. "Go on," he said. "Open it." Felicity pulled off the paper and looked at her present. Her heart twisted. It was the pretty doll from the miller's shop, dressed in the glorious blue gown, holding the pink bouquet. Seeing the doll made Felicity feel sad. It reminded her of all that she was missing. But Felicity knew her father meant well. He had given her the doll out of love. She could not bear to let her father know his present made her unhappy. So she smiled as brightly as she could and hugged her father. "Thank you, Father," she said. "It was very kind of you to get the doll for me. Thank you very much." Her father looked pleased. "Go along now and play with the doll for a while," he said. "I'll sit with your mother. I'll sit with mother. You need a rest." "Thank you, Father," she said again. Felicity carried the doll up to her room. She sat on her bed and held the doll at arm length. Its happy expression seemed empty-headed and foolish to Felicity now. "I was just as foolish as you," Felicity whispered to the doll. "I thought a lot of silly things were important before Mother was sick. I know better now." She touched the doll's cool, silky gown once, then gently hid the doll under her counterpane. She didn't want to see her anymore. "Felicity?" cried a familiar voice. It was Elizabeth. She rushed into the room. "How are you? I have missed you. I do so hope your mother is better. Look, I've brought you a present. It's a blue silk cord to wear around your neck to the dance lesson at the palace. You will look fine. It will look fine with your gown." Felicity did not know what to say. She took the blue silk cord from Elizabeth with a sad smile. "Why, Lissy," said Elizabeth, "what's the matter?" "I can't go to the dance lesson at the palace," said Felicity dully. "My gown cannot be finished in time, and even if it were finished, I wouldn't go. Father needs me to help take care of Mother. Besides, I couldn't possibly feel like dancing when Mother is so ill." "Lissy," Elizabeth said fiercely, "you have to go. Your mother would want you to go." "I don't want to go anymore," said Felicity. Elizabeth shook her head. "You don't really mean that. Oh, I wish there was something I could do." "No one can do anything," said Felicity. She pulled the doll out from under the counterpane. Elizabeth gasped. "That's the doll from the miller's shop." "Aye," said Felicity. "My father just gave her to me. I want you to take her. It makes me sad to look at her. It makes me feel foolish when I remember all the hopes I had." Elizabeth gazed at her friend. Her eyes were full of sorry understanding. At last she said slowly, "Very well, Lissy. I'll take the doll. I'll keep her for you for a while. But I won't let you forget your hopes. Remember what your father said. Christmas is a time for hopes to come true." "I've only one hope now," said Felicity, "and that is that Mother will get well. As long As the long, sad days and nights of the next week passed, it seemed the rain would never stop. Water dripped off the roof and muddied the ground. Bare, rain-wet branches scratched their fingers against the windows. Felicity was glad the doll was gone. She didn't want to think about the dance lesson. She never went to look at her unfinished gown. She knew seeing it would only make her unhappy. Mother did not get better. When Felicity was not caring for Mother, she played with Nan and William. It was hard to keep them amused when they were trapped inside every day. But they all liked to play with the ark. When they never tired of putting the animals in the ark 2 by 2. It feels as if we have had rain for 40 days and 40 nights, just as in Noah's story, Felicity said one day.
Felicity, said Nan, God told Noah to gather his family and save 2 of every animal. But what happened to the animals and the people Noah couldn't fit into his ark?
Well, the earth was covered with water, answered Felicity. So I suppose they drowned?
What's drowned?
Asked William. It's when you are all covered with water and you can't breathe, so you die.
It's when you're all covered with water and you can't breathe, so you die, said Nan. And when you die, that means you go away to heaven forever and never come back. Isn't that right, Lissy?
Yes, said Felicity.
Is Mother going to die and go away and never come back?
Asked William. No, said Felicity fiercely. She took William onto her lap to comfort him. No, she said again, more gently. Mother won't die. She will be well again. The rain will stop. All will be fine again. Just as it was in the Noah story, remember? The rain finally stopped. Noah sent a bird out of the ark. The bird came back with the sprig of leaves in its mouth, so Noah knew somewhere there was land. Felicity broke a little holly leaf off of one of the garlands her mother had made. It was stiff and dry, but it was still green. She gave a leaf to William. Just think how happy Noah must have been to see a green leaf like this, she said. The leaf showed him that everything would be all right. It gave him hope. Nan and William looked at Felicity trustingly. Need me to be brave, she thought. So she grinned. Put the leaf in our ark, William, she said. Then Arno will be happy too. William lifted the roof of the ark and put the leaf inside. Felicity looked around the parlor. Most of the Christmas decorations were growing dry and brown. I know what we should do, she said. We must pull down all these drying decorations. We'll make new decorations that are fresh and green. That way when Mother wakes up, the house will look cheery. We'll make some New Year's magic for Mother. Won't that be fine?
Yes,
said Nan and William, excited for the first time in a long while. Good then, said Felicity. She pulled a brittle sprig of holly off one of the windows and tossed it into the fire. Let's begin. Chapter 5. The Season for Surprises. Felicity leaned forward so that the sleet would not sting her face. She had a long afternoon of errands and was scurrying home from her last stop, the apothecary shop, with more medicine for her mother. She was buried so deep in her hood she jumped when she heard a coachman call out, "Stand away, Missy!" She stepped back just in time. Muddy-legged horses trotted by, pulling a carriage through a puddle right in front of her. The wheels of the carriage splashed her petticoat with slush. The carriage hastened on, headed toward the palace. Suddenly, Felicity remembered. Today is January 7th, the day of the dance lesson at the palace. Felicity shivered. She headed home, cold and wet and miserable. Felicity hung up her cloak and slipped off her muddy shoes. Her father beckoned her into the parlor. "Come here, Felicity," he said softly. Felicity's heart thudded. "What is it, Father?" she asked. "Is Mother all right?" Mr. Merriman smiled. "Come see for yourself," he said. Felicity looked behind him. "Mother!" she gasped. Mrs. Merriman was propped comfortably in a big chair next to the fire, cocooned with pillows and blankets. Nan and William and Ben stood around her. She smiled and opened her arms to Felicity. Felicity ran to her mother and hugged her gently. "Oh, Mother," she said, "I'm so glad." Felicity wanted to stay in the circle of her mother's arms forever. The fever is gone," said Father. "Her cough is still bad, and she is very weak, but at last she is starting to get better. I am indeed thanks to you, Lizzie, my good nurse," said Mother. Her voice was hoarse but full of happiness. "You've taken good care of me. Father tells me that you've taken good care of William and Nan, too. Thank you, my dear girl."
"We made new decorations for you, Mother," said Nan. "Lissy did most of the work, but William and I helped too."
"The parlor looks beautiful," said Mrs. Merriman. "It makes me feel better just to see all the lovely, fresh greenery. What a nice surprise. You truly are my Christmas sprites." She smiled at Felicity. "Perhaps we could all have a cup of hot chocolate to celebrate?" "Certainly, my dear," said Mr. Merriman. I'll make the chocolate, said Felicity. First you must go and change your clothes, said Mr. Merriman. "First you must go and change your clothes," said Mr. Merriman. "You are wet through to the skin. We mustn't have you fall sick. Go along now." Felicity hugged her mother once more, then turned and picked up a chamber stick to light the way to the stairs. "Mother is better! Mother is better!" her heart sang. Felicity felt as if her dearest wish had come true. The cold fear that had haunted her melted away into happiness and relief. Mother is going to be all right. She really and truly will be all right. When Felicity reached the door of her room, she stopped still. She could not believe her eyes. The beautiful blue gown was spread out on her bed, glowing with the light of her candle. Every stitch was perfectly finished. Was it magic? Felicity touched it to be sure it was real. The blue silk was as smooth and as soft as a sigh. But it was very real. How could this be? Felicity wondered. Who finished the gown? Then she noticed the pretty doll in its matching blue gown sitting upon her pillow. The doll's eyes were bright, and she looked even more cheery and pleased with herself than usual. Elizabeth! Gasped Felicity. Could she have done it? Oh, Elizabeth, thank you! Felicity thought. Carefully, Felicity lifted the gown in her arms and hurried downstairs to the parlor where her family and bed were still gathered. Mother sat forward in her chair. Felicity! She gasped. You have your gown! Your heavenly blue gown! Did you finish it? No, said Felicity. Elizabeth must have. Felicity held the gown against herself and twirled around. The blue silk glowed in the light of the fire and brightened the parlor. Isn't it the prettiest gown you've ever seen? Aye, said Mrs. Merriman. It is. Mr. Merriman smiled sadly. I'm so sorry you can't show off your gown as it deserves. I know this is the day of the dance lesson, but I don't know how you can be properly taken to the palace. Rose isn't home, and I can't leave your mother. You cannot possibly arrive alone, and there is no one else to escort you. I understand, said Felicity quietly. A shadow of sadness crossed Mrs. Merriman's face. She reached out to stroke the glorious blue silk of Felicity's gown. Suddenly, Ben spoke up. I'll do it, he said. I'll escort Felicity to the palace. Felicity stared at Ben. But Ben, she began. I thought you... She was too confused and happy to go on. Mr. Merriman laughed and nodded at Ben with a pleased expression. Good lad, he said. He turned to Felicity. You had better hurry and get ready, Lissy, my dear. 'Tis already nearly 4. Ben was halfway out the door. I'll get the riding chair ready and bring it out front, he said. Mrs. Merriman's cheeks were pink with excitement. Edward, she said to Mr. Merriman, please bring the bathtub and some buckets of hot water from the kitchen. Lissy must have a bath. William, fetch some of my very best soap and a linen cloth. Nan, bring a hairbrush. Make haste! We must get Lissy ready to go to the palace. Before Felicity knew it, she was scrubbed clean. Her skin glowed pink and smelled of roses. Nan brushed her hair till it was smooth and shiny as copper. As if in a dream, Felicity slipped the blue silk gown over her head. It fit perfectly. Felicity had never felt so beautiful in her life. Her hands shook a little as she tied the blue cord around her neck. Mother studied her with a loving eye. Nan, she said, run and fetch one of my best pearl earrings from the case in my drawer. Nan hurried to her mother's room and was back with the earring. Mother fastened the earring on the blue silk cord around Felicity's neck. "There," said Mother. "There." She sank back into the pillows, looking pleased and proud. "Now you look perfect. Off you go." Felicity gave her mother one last hug, then pulled on her cloak and rushed outside to meet Ben. It was still sleeting, and the roads were rutted and slippery. But Ben hurried old Bess along and pulled up the palace gates in no time. Felicity held tight to Ben's hand as he helped her down from the riding chair. She felt rather small when she looked up at the tall iron gates in the wall around the palace. Tonight the gates were open wide. Inside them, a row of lanterns lit the path up to the palace doors, and at the doors, Ben gave her hand a squeeze. "Thank you, Ben," she whispered. Ben grinned and disappeared behind her. Felicity held her breath as she was shown into the palace entry hall by a footman. The entry hall was big and a little scary. The walls and even the ceiling were covered with fierce-looking swords, pistols, and muskets, glinting in the candlelight. Another footman took her wet cloak. On wobbly legs, Felicity walked the length of the ballroom, and a very elegant lady and gentleman stood at the far end under huge portraits of the king and queen. Felicity's heart thumped when she realized this must be Lord and Lady Dunmore. She sank into a blue cloud of silk as she made her curtsy. "My lord and lady," she murmured, just as she and Elizabeth had practiced so many times. "I have the honor to be Miss Felicity Merriman." "Miss Merriman," said Lady Dunmore. "How charming! We are so glad you have come to join the others. I believe they are about to begin the lesson." "Thank you," said Felicity as she rose. The ballroom was a dazzling blue. Felicity's eyes opened wide in amazement. She'd never seen such a huge room in all her life. It was lit with dozens of candles glittering in chandeliers. Oh, if only Mother could see this, she thought. The room was full of young gentlemen dressed in bright silk breeches and coats decorated with gold braid and rows of buttons. Young ladies blossomed like flowers with breeches and taffetas, silks and velvets of every color. "But my gown is the loveliest," thought Felicity happily. Felicity looked around the room as at last she caught sight of Elizabeth and hurried toward her. But just as she reached her friend, the music began. Felicity found herself part of a set of dancers. Felicity beamed at her, but they had no chance to talk, for they were soon swept into the music and dancing. The dance master called out the dances. Felicity knew she had better pay close attention. She did not want to make any mistakes. The beautiful blue gown worked its magic as the dance lesson went on. Felicity felt more and more at ease. She did not trip or step on anyone's toes. In fact, she began to enjoy the dances. The blue gown seemed to help her swoop and swirl stay light on her feet. Why, dancing is fun, she thought with surprise. And when the dancing was over, the young ladies and gentlemen were invited to take refreshments in the supper room. Felicity had never seen such elegant food. There were towers of sweet meats and sugared fruits. There were plates of cakes and tarts, bowls of punch and platters of jellies crowded the long table. It all seemed too beautiful to eat, and Felicity was too excited to be hungry. Besides, she couldn't wait to talk to Elizabeth. "Elizabeth!" she called. She hurried over to her friend through the throng of people. "You did it, didn't you?" She held out her skirts and swirled. "You finished my gown, but however did you do it?" Elizabeth smiled and smiled. "My mother did the hardest parts, but I helped her. Even Annabelle helped," she said. "It looks beautiful, doesn't it?" Felicity smoothed the blue silk skirts and looked at Elizabeth. "How can I thank you?" "And your mother and Annabelle," she said. Oh, Elizabeth, you kept hoping even after I had given up. No one ever had a better friend than you." "You have another good friend," Elizabeth said with a grin. "Ben helped me. He sneaked the gown out of your house and then back again." "Ben?" asked Felicity. But he thought the gown was foolish, and he thought it was wrong for me to come to the palace." "How did you change his mind?" Elizabeth shrugged happily. "I just asked him to help." Did you ask Ben to escort me here tonight?" asked Felicity. "No," she smiled Elizabeth. "But I am very glad he did." "I am too," sighed Felicity happily. "I am too." When the dance lesson was over, the girls began their thank yous and their good nights. Felicity wrapped herself in her cloak as she stepped outside the palace. It was as if all the beauty from the ballroom had spilled out into the night. A fine, cool white powder of snow had come silently, making the world sparkle. Now the clouds were clearing for the first time in a long time. Felicity could look up at the stars. The moon lit the clouds from behind, so that they were outlined with silver. Ben was waiting for Felicity outside the palace. She climbed into the riding chair and sat next to him. They rode in silence for a while. Then Felicity said, "Ben, it was kind of you to help Elizabeth, and it was kind of you to escort me to the palace. What made you change your mind?" A wonderful smile lit up Ben's face. "You did," he said. "I watched you take care of your mother. I saw how you cheered Nan and William, even when all of the things you had hoped for looked impossible. I began to think your father was right. Christmas is the time when our hopes and for peace and happiness should come true. I wanted to help your hopes come true, too." "Thank you, Ben," said Felicity. They rode home together in the silverly night. that is the end of Felicity's Surprise. Reading this after watching the Felicity movie a couple times, I discovered a couple of interesting differences. In the book, it's just a dance lesson that she gets invited to, which I didn't remember that at all, even though I had read the book before, like several times. And in the movie, it's an actual ball that she gets invited to, which I can see why they changed that for the movie. It's a bit more exciting, story-wise, to be actually going to a ball than to be going to a dance lesson, even if it is at the palace. Just saying. So I can see why they changed that for the movie. Also, reading this after kind of becoming a low-key Felicity and Ben shipper. Low-key, not high-key. But I've read a few fan fiction shipping those two, and yeah, I ship it. So yeah, I can definitely see some evidence in this book that might make people ship it just with canon stuff. Because if you read certain sections in certain ways, there's definitely some shippable material right here. So yeah, I'm glad I read through this again, because the American Girl books, especially the Christmas books, are always really near and dear to my heart, because they were just like classic nostalgia for me growing up. Except for like the Kirsten ones, I never really clicked with the Kirsten ones or the Josefina ones, but I'm gonna be reading those anyway. I'm gonna try to read all of the American Girl Surprise Christmas books that I own during the Christmas series, during the Christmas season. So keep your eyes out for that, and I will see you guys next time.